All right, welcome to the Baseball Pandemic Book Club. We're back for our third year here, and I'm super excited to be joined by Scott H. Longert. Scott is the author of Victory on Two Fronts, The Cleveland Indians and Baseball Through the World War II Era. This is actually the third of a trilogy of books that Scott has written about professional baseball in Cleveland. They're all very worth checking out. I've gotten them all. My name is Luke Epplin, by the way. I'm the author of our team. But I'm really excited to be talking to Scott about a book that is near and dear to his heart and near and dear to my heart. So Scott, welcome to the book club.
Thanks, Luke. It's great to be here.
Great. So this new book, Victory on Two Fronts, is the third in what you've called a trilogy on the history of the ball club that used to be known as the Cleveland Indians, now known as the Cleveland Guardians.
Yes.
Before we get to the actual book itself, let's start with your own background. Are you from Cleveland, and have you always been a fan of the baseball team there?
Yes. Yeah. I'm born and raised here, and I've lived here all my life. I started to become a fan. I always tell folks when I was about 5 years old, I learned to read by checking the box scores of the Indians games. I was able to figure out numbers and names, and that before we were taught to read. But I was so into it then, I couldn't go to kindergarten or first grade without looking and checking the names, like looking for Colavito and anybody else, Gary Bell, whoever, and then I could see what they did. I could figure out at bats and hits, and I knew what they did, runs, RBIs, and I knew HR meant home runs. So I was I started very young, and I haven't stopped. It's been 60 some years, and I'm still going.
That's great. So this book goes up to the 1948 season. I was just wondering, did you get to see any of the players that you write about in this book play? What era of players did you grow up with for the Indians?
Yeah, my first game was in '59. So I saw Rocky Colavito play numerous times, mostly after he was traded back to us in the mid '60s. But I didn't get to see any of the '48 guys at all. Unfortunately, I was missed out on that. Though I know my father and my grandfather were big fans. They went all the time to see these guys. My grandfather was going way back to League Park at the turn of the century in the 1900s, and watched Lajoie and then Shoeless Joe and Speaker and all that. So I guess it's in my blood that I couldn't help it just to be a great fan. But I didn't get to see any. I wish I could have, but I didn't see any of the guys play.
Did your father get to see the 1948 team at all?
Oh yeah, he didn't go to the World Series, but he saw a lot of the games during the year. When he was young, he was a vendor for a while, so selling whatever he could. He said the main thing was he wasn't a very good vendor because he was watching the games for the most part. I think a lot of other guys did the same thing. They wanted to see the game, and they didn't stay on the job that long because their sales weren't that great. But that was one way to get in for free and to see what was going on. They also at League Park as well. He saw games there, and my grandfather lived for a while about a little over a mile from League Park, so he would just walk over in the afternoon and watch the games. And much to my grandmother's dismay, he would say, "I'm going to take out the garbage, be right back," and he'd disappear for 2.5 hours. And then he'd come home and she'd give him a look, and he wouldn't say a word. And that was what they used to do.
Wow, so baseball is in your family tradition. But let's talk about something else that might be associated with you. I'm interested in your journey as a writer. From what I can tell, you pursued a career as a public historian, primarily as a park ranger, while also writing freelance articles on the side. So I'm wondering how you came about to writing these books, and was it always your dream to sort of write a longer history on baseball in Cleveland?
Well, when I started out, I just was interested in writing articles. Just some things for some publications. I thought at the time working full time, that was kind of tough to do anything more. But after some years of just writing articles, I thought about, I'm really learning the subject. I'm really intrigued by what I've seen. And instead of just putting something together for like a piece for a magazine, why not try to go something full length? And so I decided to give that a shot. And it took a lot of time because back then, there was no internet and all, and all I could basically do was spend all day Saturday at the public library, microfilm, get as much as I could, and write letters to people, hopefully to get responses. But it started to build. I started to get material, and I thought, I think I can try a full-length book. So I was able to put aside the freelance for a while and work on a manuscript, which I'd never done before, and I had a lot of stops and starts because after I remember after I wrote about 30 to 35 pages, and the friends started thinking, "Who am I kidding? I can't do this. This is I'm going to be done in 3 pages. Who's going to want a 38-page?" So I had some ups and downs, but I stuck with it, and I was able to get the first manuscript done, which was about the biography of Addie Joss, who was it was just a personal hero of mine. I just thought he was a terrific guy, and I was able to get it done, and then there you could send manuscripts to publishers unsolicited, and many would look at them. It took a while, but I did get a publisher, and took a lot of rewrites because I had a lot of catching up to do, and my grammar was awful, and my syntax and all, but it was a process. And once I got the first one done, I thought, well, if I can do this, I can certainly improve on it. And Cleveland was always my subject. So then I started thinking what I should do going forward. And that's basically how it began.
Were you able to talk to any of the ball players before they passed away for for any of your books coming up?
A few. I was able to get in touch with Bill Wamby.
Oh.
And I sent him a letter, and he responded. And I was able to get in touch with Joe Wood's son. Joe was still around, but I guess he was in his 90s and his memory was going. So they tried a few times. So I got a few things about Addie Joss from Joe Wood. So indirectly, I was able to contact him. But off the top of my head, I think those are the only 2 I was able to actually get to. I talked to Patty Livingston's son, John Livingston, who knew a lot about his dad and told me a lot about him. So I was able to get more, I guess, sons and daughters of the players, unfortunately, more so than the players. Most of them had, Joe Sewell had recently passed away, and Wamby had passed. I wanted to talk more to Bill, but I wasn't able to do it. But I did speak to Steve O'Neill's daughter, another who was very sharp at age 90. She sounded like she was 25 years old. She recalled all these things, and she was terrific. She told all about her dad and their family, remembered growing up in Cleveland and Cleveland Heights. They were good. I took Lefty Wiseman's sons were around for quite some time, and they gave me a lot of information about things. They were very close to the ball club, and Bob Feller actually lived with them for a few months when he first came up. So they knew Bob extremely well and told me a lot of stories. So those were the people mostly. I couldn't find, most of the ball players were gone when I was writing, and I wasn't able to get to them.
Yeah, for this new book, I noticed that you got in touch with the family of Steve Gromek. It looks like you might have gotten in touch with the family of the Heegans, Jim Heegan.
Yes, the Heegans, yeah.
Were you able to get in touch with Eddie Robinson? I know he lived until age like 100 or so.
Yeah, glad you brought it up. I did. I forgot. Yeah, my memory is just great. Yeah, I did speak to Eddie about, I guess maybe about 3-4 years ago. He was probably about 96, but he was very, very with it too. He remembered things great. The funny part, I couldn't believe, I got the phone number from someone, and I called, and I got Eddie's answering machine. And I thought, well, I'll try back in a few days. And about 3 hours later, the phone rang, and it was Eddie. I almost fell out of my chair. And he was like, "Hi, what do you need, or what are you doing?" And I had this nice chat with him. It was just like talking to a guy next door. He remembered things. He told me some stories, and he was very, very with it. I was very happy to talk to him about his career and as a player and a front office guy. So Eddie was a good source. He remembered well. He roomed with Joe Gordon, and he knew the guys pretty well, and had some insights. And I was always curious about Pat Seary. Not a big name, but Pat was, I thought, an interesting guy, and he knew Pat, and he laughed. He told me kind of a joke about him. He said the thing with Pat was, every time he came up, either at a home run or he struck out. No singles, no doubles, no flyouts. That was it. And that's how it was with Pat. We used to watch him in the dugout and just crack up because he swings so hard every time. But when he connected, he'd hit the ball a mile. He hit him in the upper deck at Cleveland Stadium. He went out of St. Louis ballpark, out of Philadelphia. He hit a ball in a minor league park past their parking lot on top of a building. So they said everybody loved Pat. They called him the people's choice. But his career was short because he led the league in strikeouts every year, and the Indians got so frustrated they couldn't get him to put the ball in play other than homers. So they traded him to Chicago, and he was gone. But I love reading about him in his time here. I thought I wish I could have talked to him. He would have been a terrific guy to talk to about his experiences.
Absolutely, he was a man of big appetites, and
yes, he was. Yes.
All right, so let's set the stage here for your new book. This is Victory on Two Fronts, the Cleveland Indians in Baseball Through the World War II Era. This book opens with the 1942 season, and this is the season immediately after the attacks on Pearl Harbor and the US's entry into World War II. So let's set the stage here for readers. What kind of shape were the Indians in by the time the 1942 season opened? Like, what was the state of the ball club here?
Well, interestingly enough, they lost very few players. Yeah, of course, they lost some minor league players, but the major league roster, they hardly lost anybody. But unfortunately, the one guy they lost was Bob Feller, and that crippled the team immediately. Lou Boudreau was just starting out to be manager. I'm sure he was counting on Feller to be his workhorse to pitch 40, 50 ball games, and he lost them with no replacement, really. So that really destroyed their chances right away to do any kind of damage with the diluted rosters that were around. It was kind of ironic because Williams was still playing, and so was DiMaggio. And Bob probably could have played another year if he just would have waited to be drafted. They were very slow in 42 at the draft board. And I think they were a little cognizant of, once the season was underway, to leave these guys alone until September of 42, to let them finish the season, whether that was a good thing or bad thing. But I think Bob could have easily played 42. That might have turned the team around because teams were struggling. But he enlisted, and he didn't wait, and he was gone. And that just, our pitching staff, all we had really, we didn't have hardly anybody at all. Al Smith and a few other guys, and Mel Harder was coming back from elbow surgery. He was a question mark. So they didn't really have much pitching. And the 42 season was a wash, as were most of the years when Bob was gone. They would eventually lose more guys, but coming into spring training, they still had Ken Keltner. They did lose Jim Hegan, was another loss. And they had other guys still on the team. Jeff Heath wasn't being drafted. He was still there. So they had a roster of guys, but Feller made such an impact. You just can't take him out of the lineup and expect to do anything. And that's really what the war did to them. And with losing Feller, it really just, we need it until we get him back. We're probably not going anywhere. That's how it was.
It was kind of interesting. I mean, some of the things I didn't know about it was that Feller really, he's gone in 42 from the Indians, but he's playing for the Navy team. And he does end up coming back to Cleveland once or twice and sort of like giving fans a taste of what they've missed. Doesn't he come back and he pitches like a charity game there?
Yes. Yeah, that was an amazing event. I didn't know about it until I started doing the research, that the Army Navy All-Stars versus the Major League All-Stars. It was the American League All-Stars. It was Feller's idea, which was amazing. He was at Norfolk in training, and this was about April. And I think he realized, or he talked to superiors, he wasn't going overseas till at least probably September, October. There was a lot of training to do. Then they were going to send him, I think, to Great Lakes Naval Training Center as well. So he came with the idea, why not have a benefit game for the soldiers, raise money for those killed and wounded, for the families. He wrote Alva Bradley in Cleveland, and Bradley loved the idea, got clearance from Will Harridge, the American League, to do it. And they planned for an early July game right after the All-Star game. Everybody got behind it. It turned out to be a spectacular event. They drew over 60,000 people at Municipal Stadium. They tacked $1 onto the ticket prices. All that went towards war bonds. People supported it wholeheartedly. They brought in Marine bands and Marine drill units. They drove tanks from Camp Custer up to parade around the field, and half tracks and machine gun things to get the fans all revved up. They had World War I vets there to raise the flag. It was an amazing display of unity and patriotism, and Bob played a big part in it. He came out and pitched the first 2 innings, and it was pretty obvious he was out of shape because the All-Stars rocked him pretty hard. Even like Ken Keltner tripled off him and kind of knocked him out of the box. But people were just standing to see him one more time there in July to come back to town. And what he did, they raised almost a little over, I believe, $100,000, which was a huge amount that went strictly to families who were affected by the war. So this was like the first really big event to raise money for the war effort that succeeded, and people watched it and took note. And then the next year you'd see events springing up in all the cities and things to raise money. But Feller deserves a tremendous amount of credit for that. And the Cleveland Indians office too, they really jumped on it. Alva Bradley, the owner, just spoke at every group possible to sell tickets and to raise interest in it. It was a gigantic success, which they don't really get much credit for. It's pretty much unknown, or really people aren't aware of it, but it was a huge thing in Cleveland. should be really proud of it. At the time, they were showing off to the entire United States what you could do to help. It was really, really an amazing event, which is, virtually gone unnoticed or talked about.
That's really interesting. And it kind of gets into this idea of what baseball, professional baseball, was doing during the wartime. You quote Lou Boudreau, who was the player manager of the Indians, as saying in 1942, "Our biggest job by far is to provide the moral background for the war effort for the Army and Navy, and we in the game of baseball will cooperate to the fullest." I was wondering if you could kind of talk about what Boudreau meant by this, and more generally, how the Indians and professional baseball in general conducted themselves while the U.S. was at war, the things that they did to help the effort.
I think Lou was very committed to the war effort. He was for out because of his ankles. That would be debated about, but he wanted to ensure that anyone who came to a ball game got a really good show for their money, because lots of people coming were now working in the war industry, and quite a few people had their sons and their brothers and their husbands overseas. They needed an outlet. And what they wanted to do, Lou and I think most of the ball players, was to give them the best show possible. They'd buy a ticket, come to the stadium, and forget about things for at least 2.5 to 3 hours. They could cheer, they could yell, they could watch baseball, and for a little while they could be back to normal. Of course, afterwards they go back to their job and worry about what's happening with their family member who's in Europe or who's in the South Pacific. But baseball served a purpose there, I think, and Lou was very much cognizant to that. He wanted to make sure he could do his bit. If that's how it was to be, he wasn't going overseas or wasn't going in the Army. He would make sure his team would give some really good entertainment to folks who desperately needed it, with all the terrible news going on and everything that was happening daily overseas. And that was Lou's view of it. And I think he followed through. He tried his best and tried to have his team do the best they could to give people some relief and be very supportive of the war effort as much as they could, to do anything they could. If it meant visiting hospitals, if it meant playing an exhibition game somewhere near a camp, near a military camp, to make sure you get some soldiers who are on leave at the games for free and get them good seats. That's what they did. And Lou, again, should be commended for his philosophy about the whole thing. Was he wanted to help, and he did whatever he could.
Yeah, there's a part of your book that I really liked where you talked about how stadiums kind of across baseball had to have sort of contingency plans in case there were air raids that were coming along. Stadiums had to be able to shut off the lights in an instant and sort of quiet the fans, move them into safe ground and stuff like that. It's really daunting to think about something like that. So I was wondering if you can sort of discuss the challenges that the Indians in baseball had during the war, whether in terms of travel, player retention, things like this, and whether there was even a possibility that baseball might not be played during that time.
Sure, there was real concern about a possible attack on the East Coast. There was a real worry about New York and New Jersey areas, or possibly an attack coming down from Canada. It didn't seem likely. It would be like, how would the Germans be able to pull it off? But still, there was concern. So those ballparks in Boston as well, they took real precautions just in case. They hired air wardens and fire marshals and extra people just to patrol up on the top of the stands. Some of the stadiums had walkways. They'd be up there. They would have buckets and buckets of sand, fire extinguishers. They'd have fire departments on call. There was real worry, and they had drills. And they had engineers work on shutting down the lighting for night games that in some places it could be done in 30 seconds with just a couple of switches to make things dark. And then a few of the stadiums had instructions on the back of the seats. Should there be an air raid, it tells you exactly what to do, where to go, what to do, and how to react. And they had the drills. They had drills at Cleveland Municipal Stadium. Now that one is, how could there possibly been an attack to Cleveland? That just, of 700 miles from the coast, it just couldn't happen. But they still went out of their way to have a drill with the fire department, police, and everyone. They shut the lights for about 30 seconds, and the fans stayed in their seats. And there was instructions piped over the speakers that they had, and everyone handled it fairly well. And they went back to their business. But people were really concerned about what happens if maybe somehow German planes reached New York City, or they somehow U-boats would make a landing and people would come out and try and make a sneak attack, which was very far-fetched. But there was concerns in 42 that this might happen. The other concern you mentioned was, should they even be playing baseball? Should they do it? A lot of the owners were concerned about it, but President Roosevelt was adamant. He believed we need baseball. We need to keep things as normal as we can. and you guys should be playing ball. And I really am very much in favor of it. So was Commissioner Landis, who was pretty much, if Roosevelt said so, I think he would go along. So the talk about should we suspend baseball, I think that went out quickly, and that the president and the administration felt, no, you shouldn't do that. You should provide for the fans as much as you can, as much entertainment. And so they kept on going. But as the years went on, it got tougher. By 43, there were travel restrictions. So the teams could not go any further than the Midwest. So the big hot spot to train was Indiana, which I think in March, Indiana is not better than the Cleveland or even or the East Coast. You're going to run into weather problems right and left. And they did. They would have snow and sleet and rain. They would practice inside field houses. The Indians played at Purdue. And sometimes the track team had an indoor track meet. They had to just kind of wait until, for a few hours till the meet was over, and then they'd get in some practice. They had to share. And the Navy used some of the facility for training officers. So they had to make do. And exhibition games were played all around Indiana. I think New York, the Yankees were in upstate New York, and I think the Dodgers were at West Point at the military academy. It was really a tough time, and you had to get permission if you wanted to travel outside those zones. You had to get permission from the Major League front office, and then from Washington, from the transportation department, the war transportation department, to make any deviations from that. You're also told to cut the amount of players that you took on a road trip. If you knew a particular player wasn't going to play, they were a little bit hurt, or if a pitcher had pitched the day before was definitely not going to pitch, you were asked to leave them home. Umpires umpires would stay in the same city for 16 games, not to travel anywhere. So they were very serious about that. Restrictions stood through 45, that the guys could not go to Florida or California to train. I think one of the years, the Indians were only able to get in about 14 or 15 exhibition games because of the weather in Indiana and Lafayette. It was just too bad to play in, so they didn't. And I know it had to suffer, because they started in early April, and the guys hardly had any training at all, so their play was not up to where it should have been. These were the things that they had to endure. It was very tough for baseball to survive. You couldn't expect to get 30 or 40,000 at a game. Even if they played at Municipal Stadium and the Yankees were in town, they would get a good crowd, but not a pre-war or after-war crowd, because people had their mind on other things. The diehard fans, like, I've got to see the game, but others were like, I have other things to do. I have other concerns. And baseball attendance suffered. I believe one year the Indians' attendance was down to less than 500,000. So Bradley and his guys lost money. They were able to, I think in 45, they were able to break even and start to make some money then. But it was tough for the owners and stockholders to figure out, how are we going to keep this thing afloat? So you had guys playing in the major leagues who didn't belong there, paying for nothing, so the owners could make payrolls. So overall, it was a difficult experience.
One person you mentioned there was Alva Bradley, who was the face of the Cleveland Indians ownership group. I think a lot of people outside of Cleveland maybe aren't familiar with that name right now. So can you just talk a little bit about what sort of owner Bradley was, and how long he had owned the team, and the sort of challenges that he was facing?
Now, Bradley was a child of the Gilded Age. His family was very, very wealthy. He was born into it. He went to the best Ivy League college. He went to university school here in Cleveland for high school, kind of a college prep school, very, very elite. So he was a guy that had a lot of money. He made a lot more. He was a real estate guy with his brother Chuck, and they seemed to own almost every building in downtown Cleveland. They just had their hand in everything. They were definitely millionaires, I don't know how many times over. So he was a guy who liked to boost Cleveland, and he played football at the U.S. with his brother Chuck. So he was a sports guy. He had season tickets to League Park. In the 20s, we ran into a big problem when Jim Dunn died in 1922. The franchise went to his widow, who had no interest in baseball, but she kept the ownership. So the team just slid from the mid-20s. I think in 26, they had a miracle year. They actually were in the pennant race early September with Speaker and still player manager. George Burns had a career season. But at that point, Mrs. Dunn decided enough was enough. And she asked Mr. Bernard, Ernest Bernard, who was really running the ball club, doing the team for a long, long time, to find a buyer for the ball club. And then it went to Ban Johnson to try and help out. I'm sorry, Ban Johnson was long gone. Will Harridge, I think, was the league president at the time. There a lot of names came forward, but nothing was really serious. Bradley was basically a booster for the city. and he wanted to see the city succeed. And he watched the situation and saw, hey, we may get an owner from out of Cleveland. You know, we had one, he was fairly good, but he passed away in the last 5 years, or nothing. He thought maybe he should take it upon himself to get a group together and buy the ball club. He also was a proponent of the new stadium, Cleveland Municipal Stadium. It had come from the city manager's office, the idea, William Hopkins and others, and Bradley was a big supporter. He thought if they built this new stadium, basically people will come. It'll be a state-of-the-art stadium right on the lakefront, very close to hotels, restaurants. People come from all over the country to see the stadium. They'll stay downtown and spend money. He was a man ahead of his times. So when it came to it, he thought he should be the guy to buy the ball club. He and his brother Chuck, he would run it and promote the city and hopefully hire the right people and maybe bring a pennant to Cleveland. It never happened, unfortunately. He had the ball club for 20 years. He came close in 1940. I thought that he came about as close as you possibly can without winning a pennant. That was the year of the crybabies, of course, and the rebellion against Oscar Vitt. But in spite of it, they were a game behind the Tigers. That's where they finished and had a chance to win at the end of the year with a 3-game series with the Tigers, but it was not to be. So Bradley did have some good teams, and he made some smart decisions on ball players. I mean, he okayed the Bob Feller deal where they signed him when he was still in high school, even though everybody knew the Cleveland organization, they were breaking the rules and they nearly paid for it. But he was astute enough when they told him about this 17-year-old kid, go ahead and sign him. And a lot of other guys that he brought in here, Earl Averill was another one, Hal Trotsky, Mel Harder, just a lot of guys he brought in here. Jeff Heath, a troublemaker and a malcontent, but a really good ball player. So a lot of guys came and went. Kenny Kellner under Bradley's leadership. But in 46, this was a time the Indian things were starting to look better. They weren't going to win the pennant, but Feller was back. They were having a winning record going into June and July. Attendance was better, and Bradley could start to see that we're coming back. Now, what remained to be done to bring in the right guys was still up in the air to win a pennant. But this was when Bill Veeck stepped in, and Veeck very quietly found out that Bradley wasn't the majority owner of the ball club. I think technically the Sherwin family was. Bradley was right behind him, but everybody had let Bradley run the club and make all the decisions for 20 years. But what he probably failed to realize or look at was almost all the guys he went in with had passed away. They were gone. The shares were held by their widows or their sons and daughters who had little interest in the team. So if he had some foresight, he probably should have thought, I should up my stake in this ball club just to be on the safe side. He should have probably bought enough to give him 51% of the team, but he didn't. He just thought nothing would change. But Veeck found this out. And I don't know who his spies were, but they were really good. Behind Bradley's back, Veeck came to town and met with stockholders, and people agreed to sell their shares to him. And he accumulated enough stock. All he needed was the Sherwin stock. And it kind of surprised me because John Sherwin and Albert Bradley were great friends when the ball club was bought. Sherwin bought the largest chunk. I think he had 25%. I don't know for certain. And they were very close. And Bradley knew the family really, really well. I was astounded that once Veeck talked to them, one of the sons or the widow didn't call up Bradley and say, I need to tell you something. There's a guy that's buying up shares of the ball club. If you don't act, you're going to lose the team. But they didn't until the very end, just till days before Veeck was coming to Cleveland to finalize the deal. Bradley then found out he was losing the team. Of course, he was shocked. He called anyway. I can imagine that happening today to somebody, to a major league owner who didn't own 51% or more, that somebody behind it was sneaking around buying up all the stock and trying to force them out. Bradley called a meeting of all the stockholders and pleaded with them that he would buy them all out. He would take 100% of the team, but he needed a few months to raise the cash. Would they stick with him for a few months? And they wouldn't, which surprised me again. They said, no, we made an agreement with Mr. Veeck. And we're doing it. Had Bradley opened up a suitcase and put $3 million on the table, they probably would have taken or whatever the price was going to be. But he didn't, and he lost the team just like that. He was stunned to lose them. I thought it was very poignant that I saw a piece in one of the newspapers that in one of the games in the 48 World Series, when people were filing out, they wrote about an elderly gentleman dressed very well with silver hair with his family, walking out with the crowd unnoticed. It was Albert Bradley, who just was, he no longer was anybody. He was the guy that ran the franchise for 20 years, kept it going, came close to winning a pennant, and he was just forgotten. I thought it was sad. I thought he deserved better. He might not have brought a pennant here. Yeah, Veeck did and did it quickly. Veeck was a wheeler dealer, knew what to do. But Bradley had, in the minor leagues, people forget, they had already signed Al Rosen was part of the team. And we know Bob Lemon was part of the team. They had signed Mike Garcia, Dale Mitchell. So they had a pretty good nucleus of guys in their system. Now I always wonder, like, what if they kept the team? I don't think they would have traded Allie Reynolds for Joe Gordon. Gordon was a great help. He had a tremendous year in 48. But what if you had a pitching staff of Feller, Lemon, and Reynolds? That might have been enough to put him over the top in 48 as well. Bradley would have achieved his dream and could have then rode off into the sunset. But he generally saw a lot of his guys, Jim Hegan and Feller and Keltner finally win a pennant, but it wasn't with him as the owner. I still thought that was a tough chapter in Cleveland baseball history. Veeck, Veeck won it all. Kudos to Veeck. He was a super smart guy. He broke all attendance records, but I think how he acquired the team, I think he should have gone to Bradley face to face and say, look, I'm an aggressive guy. I'm going to try and buy you out, but I want to give you a chance, do what you have to do. But I want to tell you face to face. He never did. They never spoke until the Saturday of the sale. That was the only meeting they had. Bradley had to sign off, say, here's my stock, and then eventually get paid and gather up his stuff and walk out of the office. I mean, I thought that's really bad. That just is really, as much as I like Veeck and what he did, I always think that was to me, that'd be a stain on my record if that was me. That really, you should have been upfront with the guy and told him you're aggressively trying to buy him out. And it's on now. Do what you can. But that's what happened.
It's amazing. You really couldn't think of two more different people than Bill Veeck and Alva Bradley. They're from different generations. They seem to represent different things. Alva Bradley was a very sort of dignified, well-dressed individual. Bill Veeck, of course, never wore a tie and thought nothing of dignity. It is really interesting that Veeck kind of takes it over right after the war, almost in a symbolic sort of way to sort of show that baseball is moving beyond and into sort of a different generation. And I always thought that the 46 season for Veeck was an interesting sort of representation of that, because he goes through all of these things that he becomes known for: promotions, giveaways, Ladies' Day, all these sort of wild things. So, I was wondering if you could talk about Veeck's sort of philosophy about what a ballpark experience should entail and how he went about enacting that in Cleveland.
Well, Veeck was all about family entertainment. He believed going to the ballpark should be an experience, which is, again, very, very good thinking today. That's generally what we do. He wanted to see complete families there, mom, dad, and all the kids, grandma and grandpa. He wanted people who really weren't baseball fans to come to the stadium. There'd be something for them. And that was his philosophy, which was very new. He had done that somewhat in Milwaukee when he owned them before the war in the minors, but I don't think anybody thought this is going to happen in the majors. And we still had Connie Mack was still around, Clark Griffith, the old guard was still there. In fact, we were shaking things up and doing it a different way. So I think his total philosophy was to get people excited and interested and make them come to the ballpark and leave with a smile on their face, whether the team won or lost. And he did all these innovative things. I mean, right away, he started fireworks, which nobody was doing. People generally enjoyed that. It's like the kids want to see fireworks. So normally the kids would stay at home with grandma and grandpa. You brought them to the game to see the fireworks. They might squirm around and try and run around it all, but they wanted to see that. And so kids started going to games much more with their family, which is, I'm dad going to the game, mom and everyone stays home. No, dad was bringing the family, and people come from out of town to come to the ball games too. Your cousin, your uncle would come in to see the spectacle there. And it was very fun. All the nights that he had a band there full time, the Mellow Makers, entertaining people, strolling musicians that walk right up to you and play a song right at your seat. He brought in acrobats and magicians and cowboys. So I was like, whoa, what's going to be at the stadium tonight? I can't wait to look. He got people completely energized and excited about Cleveland baseball. And he put together a winning product. I think Veeck paved the way for others to come in and follow that example. It would take a while because the old guy wasn't ready to give up. I mean, Veeck, I have to think, was terribly disliked by all the other owners. I can't believe that. Maybe a couple may have, but I can't believe they had anything in common. When he'd walk into an owner's meeting just in a shirt and maybe a jacket, and he'd have different ideas about things than they did, I'm sure he would shock these guys and upset them. All in their suits with their white suits, shirts, and they've been in the game for 40, 50 years. And who is this guy? He just bought the team a year or two ago, and he's telling me what to do or how I ought to do things. And he's trying to trade. He's giving me these wild, outlandish trade offers and things. I think he was, his reception was not good there, but he was not going anywhere. He was there to stay. And I think the owners realized he's a force. they had to deal with him. And I think, credited him for changing the face of baseball. Not even talking about breaking the color barrier in the American League.
Yeah,
Even if he hadn't done that, he changed things tremendously. Even without that happening, you still would have remembered Bill Veeck and the things that he accomplished. And he was quite a guy. He was a showman. I think first and foremost, the showman who knew how to make money and what to do with it. And he was the guy to bring a pennant here. No doubt about it. He was shrewd in his trades and his acquisitions, and you saw the results just a couple of years later. But
yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, I do think that like people think of him first and foremost as a showman, but I've always thought the most important thing that he did was integrate the Cleveland club. So he chose Larry Doby, a young and somewhat inexperienced player from the Negro Leagues. He played on a team called the Newark Eagles. So I was wondering if you could talk about more how Veeck went about integrating the Indians and what Larry Doby's journey was like to the majors, and how different it might have been than, say, Jackie Robinson's journey.
Oh, sure. Yeah, Veeck, I was obviously closely watching when Branch Rickey signed Jackie Robinson. I think it was in Veeck's mind that when I get a hold of Cleveland, when I have my feet planted here in Cleveland, I'm going to do the same thing. But Veeck also, I think, as much as he wanted the publicity and, again, to put more people in the stands, he wanted a good ball player. So he had two objectives. I mean, you knew Jackie was a great ball player, but he knew out when he wanted to bring somebody in just to have them walk around and people say, I got to go and see the African-American for the Indians. He wanted a really young, good ball player. So apparently he had a group of people that he assigned or hired and sent them looking all around the country. And he wanted their opinion on who the best players were. And he waited. I think Abe Saperstein from the Globetrotters was one of the guys who went looking. And the consensus was, and all the information he got from what I could read was, the best young ball player in the Negro Leagues is Larry Doby. And then I believe he did some fact checking on Dobie. He sent his chief scout to watch him for a couple of weeks. And word came back that Dobie was a great ball player and he seemed like a good guy, a young man with a young wife. And he would be the guy, I think, that could handle this. So Veeck made the decision. He went about it and decided he's going to do it. And he did bring Dobie in. Larry, of course, was very surprised by when he found out. I think he first got a call from Mrs. Manley, the owner of the team, and told him she had sold his contract to Veeck. And then a couple hours later, when the Indians were calling Larry, all this after I think he played a doubleheader on the road. He got home very late and got very little sleep. And all of a sudden, then a few hours later, there's photographers and reporters pounding on his door. Like, that's a lot to take in just a few hours. And the Indians wanted him almost immediately, just to get your stuff together. They were sending a guy there, and the next day to come to Chicago to play. So Larry had to digest it all in a few hours and realize this gigantic undertaking that he's going to break the color barrier, and it's going to be a really difficult thing to do, knowing people are not going to accept him. Even on his own team, he's probably going to have some problems. And all around the league, he's going to have problems. He's not going to be able to stay in the team hotels at some of the places, particularly on the western part of the American League. So he knew he had a tremendous, and it always, like, his head had to be spinning. Like, and am I good enough to play? I know I'm a good ball player, but really, am I a major leaguer? Only Jackie is playing. Maybe I'm not good enough. I don't even know. So he had to be facing tremendous things, but yet he handled them as a gentleman, which was really quite a compliment to Dobie, that he took everything that got thrown at him, and he survived, and he eventually prospered. I'm sure the early days were just awful. When he came to Chicago, from what I read, that some of the guys on the team wouldn't even talk to him or shake his hand. Guys like Hegan, shook his hand, like Mel Harder, Steve Gromek, and Feller. Feller didn't care. He was guy. If he's, if we're going to make money, great. So Feller didn't bother Feller at all. He would tour with Satchel Page's AllStars when he was barnstorming. But some of the other guys on the team apparently did not want anything to do with him. They made it really tough on him. And the one thing Veeck didn't do, he didn't have Lou Boudreau in on the loop. So he basically told Lou, "Here's this guy. He's coming in. I don't know where you can play him," because Dobie was an infielder, to make things even worse. Now you've got this great infield. Fine with Keltner at third, Boudreau, the player manager, at short, Joe Gordon at second, and Eddie Robinson at first. Where is Dobie going to play? You can't say, okay, I know you haven't played the outfield, but you're going to put you in center field. Good luck. He couldn't do that. So Boudreau had a problem. Where am I going to play him? The only place he could possibly play was first base. And he did, but there was an incident between Robinson and Dobie. Robinson was extremely upset about it. And there's a lot of different theories about what actually was going on. He wouldn't give up his glove. They had a real tough time giving his glove to Dobie. But rather, Robinson would say later that it wasn't about Dobie. He thought he was losing his job. He thought they brought Dobie in to play first base, and he was any minute he was going to get sent back to Baltimore or whatever. He was furious. He thought because Boudreau had given him a vote of confidence a couple of weeks earlier and told him, "You're my first baseman," because he was in a slump. Don't worry about it. You're my guy. And then 2 weeks later, here's a new guy, and they want him to give up his glove. So he said, "What am I supposed to think? I think I'm going." So he was very upset about the whole thing, and there was a big to-do. Other people said, no, it was a racist thing. He would not give his glove to a black man. But, it's hard to know what really was the truth there. There might have been a little of everything in it. But I do know in researching Eddie Robinson, in the off season, he worked at the JCC, a Jewish community center, teaching young boys how to play basketball. So if you really were very much of a prejudiced person, that you don't think you would want to do that. He also worked at a jewelry store owned by a Jewish family. So maybe, so it's hard to know exactly what happened. But Larry's reception was really tough. It's other cities. He would mention the guys would spit on him. Shortstop spit on him when he slid in a second, but he wouldn't name names. That was the thing about Larry. Not until much, much later would he even mention a name or two. But a lot of guys did things or said things that he never mentioned them or never would reveal it. So he had his problems. And even too, after he finally made it through 47 and he went to spring training, he couldn't stay at the Indians team hotel, which the only thing I kind of look at back, like, how could you let that happen? Now, this is your guy you brought in. You brought the team to Tucson. You made all the arrangements. The city's now making money. He couldn't have done something to get Dobie in the regular hotel. Dobie had to stay with so-called friends, as they say. That bothered me too. Like, how could they have let that happen? The Cleveland management, that he should have been in whatever hotel the team was. He should have been there in Tucson, and he wasn't. So he still, in 48, he still had to deal with things like that, which wasn't good. And they brought Satchel Page in, but they were complete opposites.
Yeah,
they were not, they liked each other, I understood, but they weren't friends. They didn't hang together. Satchel would go out every night and party till early hours of the night or the morning. And Larry was all business. Larry wanted to rest and go out there and play the best that he could. So these guys were not exactly leaning on each other's shoulder at all. Satchel was much older. So Larry was on his own, and he persevered. It's an amazing accomplishment what he did. All those things to stay there and take the abuse and not say a word. So gradually it started to get better. Things got a little better, but they were never just perfect. It was never like wonderful all the time. But he was an amazing individual. Beck did a great thing to bring him in, and Larry really showed everybody basically what I wanted to show. What he said, I'm just a ball player. That's all I am. I'm not this, I'm not that. I'm a ball player like everybody else. That's what he wanted to be, and he was eventually, and he was able to be that. So I think, in the end, it's a happy story in the end, but very difficult for Larry to do. It's just, I can't imagine someone going through that.
Yeah, and you'd mentioned Satchel Page, who gets brought in midway through the 1948 season. He's the first black pitcher in the American League to come in, but he obviously has a much different road to the majors than Larry Doby. For one thing, he's much older and he's already sort of a star. Like, can you talk about how he came in and how that is sort of different than Larry Doby and his effect on the team?
Satchel was extremely well known in all the American League cities. He had pitched just about everywhere in exhibition games and in the Negro League. So a lot of people had seen him play and knew what he was capable of. And he was a very colorful character. There are all kinds of silly stories about him. He denied, from what I read, he denied most of them. But he was very much upfront. People were Satchel Page is coming to Cleveland. Like, I got to see this. He had a long experienced career. He was a great pitcher. People knew his abilities. So it's a little different for Satchel. The color barrier was still bad. He still had issues. He had to stay with friends and the usual. I think there was a hotel in the black community that he and Larry stayed in when the team was in town. That's the only place they could stay. But Satchel, I wouldn't say had it easier, but he was much wiser. He knew what he was getting into, but he had been around for years and years, and this was his chance to play in the major leagues. Even though he was past 40, he relished the chance, and he knew he could help. He probably didn't have questions about, because he had played against these guys in exhibitions and barnstorming for years and years and years. He knew he could strike anybody out. He could get people out. He knew what he could do and what he was capable of. So I think this situation was a little different. He was brought in to immediately help, and everyone expected him to really help. It wasn't a matter of, well, we'll see what he can do. We don't know. No, they knew what they were getting in Satch. And before, I believe, they actually put his name on a contract he signed, he came to Municipal Stadium they brought Boudreau there, and Satch threw about 30 pitches. Lou wanted to watch, and from what I read, they were like almost all strikes. Almost every pitch was like a perfect pitch on the corner, at the knees, at the shoulders. And Boudreau told Veeck, I think he can help us. And then they signed Satch, and he did. He was tremendous down the stretch. He went 6 out of 7, which is great for them. He faded a bit at the end of September, but he was a great help in the stretch. And he brought lots and lots of people to the stadium. He was so popular. Hal Lebovitz, who was writing for the News, wrote this little nickel mini biography of him, and they sold. I think it was extremely popular. It was a lot of tall tales from looking through it and all about stories about Satch, but he was quite a character and made great news copy. There was always a story you could write about Satch and his antics or what he supposedly would do or wouldn't do. So he had a little different than Larry. Still had the same prejudices, but he was a grown man who'd been around. He understood the way things were. He was prepared and ready to face it. And he was prepared. He knew the Indians were fighting for a pennant. He knew why he was brought here, to help him on the pennant race. So that was a big consideration there. He knew what he was getting into, and I think he was ready for the challenge.
Yeah, I want to make sure we get it to some of this 1948 season, because you do such a great job of documenting not only the sort of ups and downs of the Indians, but just how thrilling that year was. This is one of the closest pennant races in American League history. You've got 3 other teams vying for the pennant: the Athletics, the Red Sox, and the Yankees. And the Indians kind of improbably are going for it as well. Let's talk about, we can sort of lump them together if we don't have as much time here. Let's talk about some of the key contributors there. I'm interested in Gene Bearden, Bob Lemon, and of course the captain, Lou Boudreau. They really sort of propel the team, but they're all so different. And Bearden and Lemon in particular just seem to come out of nowhere. I mean, it really is a Cinderella story.
It is. It's incredible when you look at these guys and examine who they were. Where Lemon was an outfielder. He was a very good center fielder. I guess he had some decent speed and a really good arm. He was brought up to the ball club to play the outfield, and they thought they had one of their new outfielders, but he had difficulty hitting. So they had a dilemma there. What do we do with Lemon? We like his fielding, we like what he does, but he's not hitting. Do we send him down, or what do we do? And apparently Lemon had pitched in the South Pacific when guys were playing ball, some of the major leaguers who had time in the islands to play a bit, and he volunteered to pitch. And apparently he pitched very well. He threw hard and he had a curveball. And I believe it was Bill Dickey who talked to Boudreau and said, you got a pretty good pitcher there and you don't know it. You ought to give him a shot at pitching. And Boudreau was like, oh, geez, I didn't know. And they gradually let him pitch in relief. And the more he pitched in relief, they realized he's got a major league arm. He needs he needs a few pointers here and there to do, but I think he can help us as a pitcher. And by 47, he was getting in the starting rotation, and he was a bona fide major league pitcher, a guy who came up to who converted to a pitcher without going back to the minors. Can you imagine that's a day like the Indians taking Bradley Zimmer and saying he's going to pitch in relief in 2 days? Now that would never happen. So we think he can pitch because he throws so hard. You would never do that. The very most, you would send him to the minors to learn from some number of coaches. But they went to Lemon, and he struggled a bit, but he proved his worth and became one of the best starters in the American League. In 48, he was tremendous. Yeah. Then you have Gene Bearden. Yeah. Too. Bearden is in the Yankees organization. Bearden is a World War II vet, was seriously injured when his boat was torpedoed by a Japanese sub. He's injured so badly that he's in the hospital for months. I believe he had a plate put in his head, or his leg was nearly shattered. He was unconscious for days. He was in danger of losing his life, and let alone he's able to come back and play baseball. But somehow the Yankees didn't apparently think much of him. And Veeck, in his usual way of doing things, which you always say, how did he do it? He somehow talked to Casey Stengel, and Stengel told him about, you ought to get this guy out in the Pacific Coast League. He's got a knuckleball. He's really good. If you make any deals with the Yankees, you ought to get this guy. And they made a deal, but it really wasn't for Bearden. It was Veeck said, yeah, I want this Bearden guy as our third guy in the deal. It was like he was the main thing. I don't think the Yankees even blinked. Who? Bearden? Oh, that guy. Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, you can take it. But what does he want him for? He's, we don't think he's a major league prospect. And Bearden in 48 is one of the best pitchers in the American League. He's unhittable most of the year. He's durable. He can pitch every 2 days with his knuckleball. And without him, I don't see how they would have won the pennant. So here you got this World War II vet, the Purple Heart that's nearly killed in action, an ex-center fielder. And then you have Boudreau, who's been a good ball player all his career, but out of nowhere, he has a fantastic season, his greatest season ever. He does everything right, makes all the right moves. He has a tremendous year batting. His home runs and RBI totals are off the charts. It was like he knew this was the time, and if he had a year left, this was the year to expend it. And he just was outstanding. And the one game that just fascinated me was the doubleheader with the Yankees in late August, where everything was on the line. The stadium was filled, 70,000 plus people, and Lou's on the bench with a sprained ankle. And they're down 6-1, and in game one, they come back to 6-4. They load the bases. There's 2 outs, and Boudreau calls time, and they're looking like someone's going to pinch hit. Who's it going to be? And he comes out of the dugout. He has to be limping a little bit because his leg is really sore. He's putting himself in the game with everything on the line. He's going to be the pinch hitter. And what does he do? He lines a shot to center field, scores the 2 runs. We go on to win. We win the doubleheader. Didn't clinch the pennant, but the momentum there was you can't downplay the momentum. And he knew at the most crucial time of the season, someone had to do it, and it was him. I mean, what if he had struck out? Everyone remembered that too. But he came through with an unbelievable clutch hit and essentially propelled us forward, and we hung on. And though we had some hiccups in September, we managed to tie Boston, win the playoff game, and get to the World Series and win it. So these 3 guys, all very disparate guys who had really very little in common, propelled us to this championship. And that'll be the only time. It wouldn't happen in 49, even with all the guys back. It just wouldn't happen again. But it was something magical that each guy came forward with the best possible effort they could. And they helped us and probably pushed us to the pennant and to the World Series. Yeah,
it's a magical season. Everything just seems to break right for Cleveland. It's like like a gambling streak or something. They just went on a hot streak. They faced the Boston Braves in the World Series in 1948. There's 2 games that I've always that have always intrigued me about that series. The first is Game 1, where you've got Bob Feller finally making it to the World Series. Yeah. He's somebody that came up out of nowhere in 1936 as a sort of 17-year-old, and it seemed like it was going to be his destiny to lead the Indians to the World Series. And he pitches his mind out that game, but gets beat on a pretty questionable called play. And it's really heartbreaking because I wish he could have won that game. But
me too. He should have won the game. He pitched tremendous. He threw basically a shutout for 8 innings, but unfortunately Johnny Sane was just as good that day. But Feller did everything possible to win. This was his chance. He'd been waiting for 12 years for this chance. The opening game, there's no question who was going to pitch. Everything was, you thought would have been the storybook ending. Bob wins the World Series game. We win the World Series. You know, you go out in glory. Bob could still pitch and would pitch for more years, but this was his moment he'd been waiting for. He had absolute command. The Braves couldn't touch him. They couldn't get anything together. And then you have the disputed pickoff play where, to me, I mean, I've seen the film a while back, and to me, I'm a Cleveland. It sure looks like Phil Macy is clearly out. His hand is about 4 inches off the bag, at least, when Boudreau swiped his shoulder. It looks pretty clearly when they stop the film or slow it down, he's out. But this was a National League umpire. And they had talked about, I believe, earlier, all the umpires got together and said, the Indians have a pickoff play to the National League umpires. You guys be aware of that. The American League umpires were, but I don't think Bill Stewart was. I think he forgot about it, wasn't paying attention. He was out of position. And he didn't see it clearly, but he made his call, and I believe he made the wrong call. And of course, Tommy Holmes gets a base hit. You knew that would happen, and Macy scores. We lose the game 1-0. But it was just tragic for Feller. I just can't believe what he must have thought after the game. I know Boudreau fought as hard as he could with Stewart to get him to change the call, but of course he wouldn't. Yeah. It was just awful for Feller. He'd have another chance, but he got knocked out. He had nothing that day. He got knocked out of the box, and we lost the game, and that was it. I think pretty much for the game 6, it was a given that Lemon was going to pitch, and if he faltered, Bearden was going to come in to finish it out. Bob was done. Yeah, maybe if there was a game 7, maybe he would have gotten the mound, but I see that, Bob I'd never heard him talk really much about disappointments in his career, but that had to be number one. With regard everything that happened was he had that chance to win a game. He pitched tremendous. He had a shutout going, gave up 1 run. The guys couldn't get 2 runs for him. Then he had this bad pickoff play, and it was lost. It really was. It's all the euphoria. We win the World Series. We're champions after 28 years. What a year. He didn't get to win a World Series game.
It's really sad. And it's also kind of interesting because you have Feller, who was the sort of face of the Indians for so long and sort of the destined, golden boy that was going to help them win. And really the other image that I take from that World Series is from Larry Doby when he hits this crucial home run in Game 4 off of Johnny Sane. And then the Indian starter, Steve Gromek, a surprise starter, embraces Doby in the clubhouse afterward. And you have this tremendous photo of the two embracing. I'd love for you to talk about sort of the significance of that moment and how that photo resonates beyond baseball. And I think it still resonates today.
I think it does. It's a classic photo. Gromek was a good pitcher, but he was the odd man out when Satchel Page came in. They used him in spot starting, and he pitched really good. I believe he won about 6 or 7 games, only lost a couple. He pitched well in September, won him a couple of ball games. Gromek, as I mentioned earlier, was one of the first guys that shook Larry Doby's hand. Steve was a guy, from what I learned on top of it, just a guy that he didn't have these prejudices. He just was happy to have someone on the team and was a friend somewhat to Larry and was not going to give him any grief. And Gromek was thrilled he got the start. He wouldn't expect to play. As I wrote in the book, he called his father before this World Series started and said, "Don't sit by the radio the whole time. I'm not going to pitch. Don't worry about it." And he's surprised he did pitch game 4, but he was ready, even though he hadn't pitched in about 8 or 9 days. He was ready. He couldn't wait to get out there, and he pitched probably the game of his life. He was tremendous. Gave up the 1 run on a homer. Went the 9 innings. Pitched very strong throughout. And Dobie got the winning hit. Dobie hit the home run. So you have 2 ball players there. They won the game. I think on that one level, Gromek is so proud of himself that he responded to the challenge and they won Game 4. He pitched tremendous. Dobie had to be just jumping out of his shoes. He hit the home run to win the game. If that doesn't show he's a good ball player, what does? He had a great season anyways, but they're both extremely happy. When the photographers asked them to pose for a picture, Gromek had no problem at all. Here was the guy that won him the game. He did what he would always do to someone like that. He gave him a huge hug and a huge smile. I think Larry might have been taken aback a little, but you see this huge smile on Larry's face. I think what went through his head right then and there is, I have arrived. I am a ball player and people are now accepting me. And that picture went out all over the country. And I think people started to realize he's a ball player. That's all it is. These are just 2 ball players. So happy. They both contributed to win a World Series game, the best games of their lives. They're just 2 ball players happy. That's all it is. There's nothing else to this picture. It's a black guy and a white guy celebrating, as it should be. And that's what it was. And I think Dobie even said later there, he started to feel the road was opening up a bit. The light was going on after that he was just being congratulated for a ball player, nothing more. And he was thrilled by it. And Gromek was so thrilled to be the winner and have the people around him. He never thought twice. So why shouldn't I hug him? This guy won the game. You see guys hugging all the time in these pictures in the clubhouse. Dan Lemon hugging somebody Boudreau hugging somebody, or you see that throughout the years, guys, because they're so happy with what they accomplished and they want to celebrate. And I think that spoke miles for situation. I think some people who were probably thought something, I should stop this thing about who cares what Dobie is. He's a really good ball player, and I want to see the team win. That's first. And also forget, I'm not gonna say anything or bother him again. And then eventually Willie Mays came by and Hank Aaron and other guys came in, and wow, it's great to see these guys play. And I think it went a long way towards getting to be just, let's see who the ball players are. We don't know who they are, if they're black, if they're white, if they're Latino. I want to see them play ball. They help the team so much better. And I think, obviously things were not perfect. They still aren't perfect, but I think it was a great moment for 2 men. And I think Gromek deserves a lot of credit, as does Dobie. Gromek could have just, shook his hand or pat him on the back. No, he didn't do it. He just grabbed him like, you're my man. You won the game for me.
Yeah,
and that was a great accomplishment. I talked to Steve's son Greg about, I thought that was just if Steve didn't do anything else in baseball, that was quite a defining moment.
Absolutely, and it really speaks to why that team, the 1948 Indians, is still so resonant right now. They're the first integrated team to win the World Series. I think that they still are important for baseball history. And so you've done a great job of going through 25 years of Cleveland baseball, possibly even more. And so I guess we'll end with this. Do you have plans to keep going? Are you planning to write, more on the Indians/Guardians through the 50s and perhaps beyond?
It's possible. I've been mulling over different ideas. Lately, I've been doing a lot of research on Ray Chapman. That's been, I researched Ray when I wrote my book on the 1920 team, but not fully. And I just decided I wanted to learn more about him and his circumstances and about the Chapman family, Ray and his wife, Kathleen, and the daughter, Ray. Unfortunately, all of them passed away within 9 years of each other. So I wanted to learn more about them. So I've been doing that. So I'm not sure what that'll come out to. Maybe an article, maybe a short story. I don't know if there's a book involved just about Ray as a ball player. I mean, he's unfortunately famous for being hit in the head and dying in 1920, but otherwise I don't know. But that's what I've been doing lately. But maybe about the 50s, there were a lot of interesting guys who came through in the 50s. We were talking earlier, but even the late 50s, with Roger Maris passed through town briefly here. We had Minnie Minoso come back. We had Jimmy Pearsall.
Yeah,
Who a lot of people may have forgotten, but all the antics he had. So we had some, and Billy Martin was here for a short time. We had some characters and people here. We didn't win a pen in '59. It came close for the Chicago, which is too much to overcome. But there were some interesting people. Maybe there's something there that I'll investigate. But now I'm just trying to think about things and trying to promote my new book as much as I can, get out there and try and make things happen after like almost 2.5 years of not being able to get out. Now I really want to get out. The same thing. You really want to get out and meet people and talk about what you do. So those are the things that are going on now. But maybe I can do something.
Well, Scott, it's been great to talk to you. Once again, Scott's book is called Victory on Two Fronts, the Cleveland Indians in Baseball Through the World War II Area. Even if you're not a fan of Cleveland, this documents at a very important time in baseball history and a very important team, as we have just discussed. So I highly recommend it. And it's been such a joy talking to you, Scott. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you, Luke. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate what you've done as well to promote Cleveland baseball from the 40s. Your book is outstanding. And I highly recommend to folks out there that to take a look.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott.
Thanks, Luke.